Hello history buffs and welcome back to the channel. I'm Hannah, and with the release of season 2 of Wolf Hall, I'm going to be going back through season 1 and then season 2 and telling you all of the Easter eggs and references I found in each episode. Please note that this is not a review, nor is it a what was accurate video, as this is adapted from historical fiction. As always, let's start with the episode title, The Devil's Spit. This is a reference to the superstitious beliefs of the time, hinting at the religious tensions and accusations of heresy that play out in the episode. According to English folklore, the Devil's Spit is a warning about picking blackberries after Michaelmas Day, as the blackberries belong to the devil. It is thought that Lucifer, a fallen angel, fell from heaven and landed in a blackberry bush, which, if you didn't know, are actually quite thorny. He was so angry with the bush that he spat on it and cursed the remaining blackberries, which I just want to say that I have no idea when Michaelmas Day is, even now, although I think it happens in September, and I have picked blackberries as a child without even blinking at this superstition. And I'm fine, as far as I can tell. I hope. Disappointment, fear and strain are the main themes of this episode. Cromwell's relationship with both the king and queen are strained, independently. Henry and Anne's relationship is strained. Henry is disappointed with the birth of a daughter. And the court is fearful of what Henry might do next. Henry's opening line of the episode is, "Healthy. Call her Elizabeth and cancel the jousts."
Healthy? Call her Elizabeth. Cancel the jousts.
This shows Henry's utter disdain at the fact it's not a boy. The only saving grace is the fact that the child is healthy, as it means that Anne is capable of producing more heirs, or so he thought. Unlike Catherine of Aragon, who had 6 pregnancies and only one of those 6 was healthy, the Princess Mary. And Mary was her mother's 5th pregnancy. So although disappointed, Anne so far has a better track record than Catherine of Aragon. One of the courtiers then even picks up on the fact he doesn't ask how Anne is doing after the birth of their daughter.
He didn't ask how the Queen was.
Again, showing how cruel and callous Henry is becoming, and the resentment he is holding towards Anne, as she promised him a boy. We then cut to Cromwell visiting Anne, who mentions that her daughter Elizabeth is to live at Hatfield, which is where Elizabeth did indeed spend a lot of her childhood. Anne then says, "I think Spanish Mary's household should be broken up. She can become a member of my daughter's household." I find this interesting, as in the last episode she referred to Mary as the so-called princess. So although begrudging, she did acknowledge Mary's status as a princess and daughter of her husband, the king, even though at that time Mary had been declared illegitimate. But now, since the birth of her own daughter, and in her mind the only princess, she refers to her stepdaughter as Spanish Mary.
I think Spanish Mary's household should be broken up.
Not even recognising her as the Lady Mary, which was her official title. Hi everyone, I'm so excited to finally share something that I've been working on for months. My book. I have poured so much love into this project, working closely with my amazing illustrator to make it as vibrant and engaging as possible. It's full of fun rhymes and colourful pages that bring history to life. Because, let's face it, King Henry VIII and his 6 wives had some seriously dramatic stories. You'll meet 3 Catherines, 2 Annes and 1 Jane, and you'll finally nail that classic rhyme, divorced, beheaded, died, divorced, beheaded, survived. Whether you're a kid or a history buff just like me, or just someone who loves a good story, I think you'll love this book. It's been such a joy to create, and I can't wait for you to read it yourself. You can grab your copy now on Amazon, just click the link below, and if you do, let me know in the comment section below. I'd love to know what you think. Thanks for all your support and happy reading. Anne then also mentions how she thinks Mary should be part of Elizabeth's household, which does happen in December of 1533. Mary, who was 17, was forced to be in her 3-month-old half-sister's entourage. As Alison Weir puts it, Lady Mary's household was disbanded and was sent to Hatfield, not without protest, to act as maid of honour to her half-sister. That must have really stung. When Anne initially raises this to Cromwell, he seems confused on what role Mary would take in Elizabeth's household, to which Anne rather savagely says, "As a servant, there can be no pretence of equality. She's a bastard." Which, wow, okay. But also from Anne's point of view, I get it. She's stamping her authority, but also playing into this evil stepmother narrative that is often told of Anne. Anne then asked Cromwell to go to France to sort out a marriage proposal between Elizabeth and a French prince. And by July 1535, King Francis, the man that Anne flirted with in the last episode, and also the King of France, did agree to enter negotiations for Elizabeth to his third son. So it took a few years, but Anne did eventually achieve this. We then cut from the very demanding and almost bullying Anne Boleyn to the kind and caring Jane Seymour, cuddling a puppy. You couldn't compare and contrast these two women any differently if you tried. And despite the show trying to paint them as polar opposites, I still stand by my opinion that the women were more alike than what we think, or what we are told. Jane Boleyn, Lady Rochford, then offers to spy for Cromwell in Anne's chambers. This sets up two things. One, how she allegedly brought down the Boleyns, more specifically her husband George, with accusations against the king, and two, how she then acts as a go-between, a woman in the shadows for Henry's future queen and Anne Boleyn's cousin, Catherine Howard. We then cut to Elizabeth Barton, the Nun of Kent, being interrogated. She appears unstable and vengeful. The other councillors who are interrogating her are quite dismissive, and even at points mockful, showing us that they believe she is mad, laughing when she says that the devil looks like a bird, and even jibing at her for her prophecy to be wrong, and what happens now that the king is married to the queen for several months and that they have had a healthy baby. She then claims that everyone in the room will die in 6 months except her. Making more ludicrous claims, the cracks in Elizabeth Barton's deception are showing. As Cromwell says, she's close to confessing because she knows that she's a fraud. Cromwell then questions her influential supporters, demonstrating his superior intellect and political acumen. The portrayal of Plantagenet descendants' opposition to Henry VIII in Wolfhall simplifies their motivations. Their genuine concerns for Catherine of Aragon, Princess Mary, and England's religious future during the Reformation are not fully explored. Instead, the Poles, the Courtenays, and Bishop John Fisher are depicted as naive and ungrateful. First up is Bishop Fisher, and Cromwell just blatantly calls him out, telling him to stop being such a child and just lie. Blame it on old age, infirmity to keep his head. This calls back to what Anne Boleyn said in a previous episode, that one should say what is necessary to keep their head.
People should say whatever will keep them alive.
And Cromwell is following her advice, even if their current friendship is a bit frosty. He then recommends that Fisher falls ill and takes to his bed, a strategy that Cromwell does for 2 weeks before the downfall of Anne Boleyn, an illness that is widely regarded by historians as a feigned illness, so he could plot how he was going to do it. Lady Margaret Pole acts as if she's got the upper hand and that Cromwell can't prove anything. He then reveals that he had spies everywhere, and you watch her face drop as he reveals what was said at the dinner table. Although we don't know if this actually happened. If anything, I think Lady Margaret Pole was quite loyal to King Henry VIII. This does demonstrate how Cromwell had spies everywhere. Wolf Hall exaggerates the connections between Barton's followers and an alleged international conspiracy against England. The series presents an implausible scenario where Lady Mary, who was closely monitored and mistreated, dines with her Yorkist relatives to discuss Spanish invasion plans. Such meetings, if they occurred, would have constituted treason and resulted in immediate arrests. The show's depiction of England fearing Spanish invasion in the mid-1530s is historically inaccurate. The Exeter conspiracy, which led to the downfall of Henry Pole and Edward Courtenay, actually took place years later, between Henry's third and fourth marriages. When Henry reads the list of people who have conspired against him, he is astonished by the names on the list that include Exeter, who he views as a friend. He then blames his wife, to which he says she is weak like all her sex. This plays on Henry's opinion of women. We know that as much as Henry loved women, he never thought that they were capable of ruling a country. Hence why Henry has so many wives. If he thought that women were capable of being monarch, he would have been okay with 2 daughters. But he has to have Edward. And yes, he did eventually put both Mary and Elizabeth back into the line of succession, but that was just really a backup plan. I fully believe that he thought his 2 daughters would never become queen, because he was confident that his son Edward would marry and produce heirs of his own. And the only reason his daughters were as well educated as they were was down to their mothers/stepmothers. Henry didn't really take an active involvement in Edward's education either. That was down to Catherine Parr. Cromwell is then pulling the strings again. He was the one to interview these people and advise them to essentially apologise. And now he is advising Henry to pardon them. Cromwell meets up with More, who asks about the charges. Cromwell says the charge and then lists off potential punishments, such as life imprisonment, confiscation, and fines. Notice, however, that he doesn't say anything about death. No execution, beheading, burning. So despite the fact that these people have committed treason, this Cromwell is not out for blood. He even says that he thinks the king will be merciful. More then double checks with Cromwell that he is clear and not under superstition, as he made it clear to Cromwell in the last episode that he did not entertain Elizabeth Barton and saw her only as an attention seeker. And we did see earlier in the episode when one of the councillors brought up More's name along with the Poles, Exeter's and Bishop Fisher, that Cromwell did say, "No, he's clear." So, although More doesn't know it, Cromwell is looking out for him. A clever historical nod occurs when Cromwell reminds More of a past conversation. Do you remember how you used to compare the king to a tamed lion? You can pet him, but all the time you are thinking to yourself, those claws, look at those claws. This metaphor foreshadows Henry VIII's ruthless nature. Cromwell then informs More that they are putting together a bill of succession, a reference to the 1534 Act of Succession. This was the first Act of Succession to be passed in Henry's reign and required his subjects to accept the king's marriage to his second wife, Anne Boleyn, as undoubted, true, sincere, and perfect. Also notice how he says their children, plural, as the rightful heirs, plural, telling us that Cromwell fully expected Anne and Henry to have multiple children. But we obviously know otherwise. Cromwell then tells More that the bill would be supported by an oath. This is a reference to the Oath of Supremacy. It required any person taking public or church office in England to swear allegiance to the monarch as head of the Church of England. Cromwell tells More if he wants people to know where his loyalty lies and not come under suspicion, then he should sign the oath. More then changes the subject and makes another claim that Elizabeth Barton made the prophecies for attention. Two things. He changes the subject because he's been made uncomfortable. We know More won't swear the oath, as this is how he ultimately loses his life. But he has drawn back onto Elizabeth Barton to once again reaffirm his position as not entertaining Barton's prophecies, as he does want to save his skin. He just can't bring himself to swear the oath. Also, the fact that More finds it odd that an oath is needed to secure the validity of the Act of Succession shows just how unstable Anne's role as Queen was, due to the amount of people that had support for Catherine of Aragon still. You can see from his response that it is very unprecedented. Cromwell then invites More to dinner, but More declines, saying,
"If you only wanted to put food in my mouth, but I think you'd like to put words there too."
The phrase is a clever and somewhat sarcastic comment that plays off two meanings of putting something in someone's mouth. So the literal meaning, putting food in someone's mouth, refers to feeding them, which is the normal expectation of a dinner invitation. The second meaning, or its figurative meaning, putting words in someone's mouth, means attributing statements or opinions to someone that they didn't actually say. More is declining Cromwell's dinner invitation, suspecting that the meal isn't just about sharing food, but also an attempt to persuade him to convert. By saying this, More hints that Cromwell might be trying to pressure him into saying things that he doesn't believe, like renouncing his faith or agreeing to the oath. This response subtly sets a boundary, signalling that while More might enjoy the dinner, he is aware of Cromwell and what he's trying to do. It's a witty yet pointed way of acknowledging that Cromwell's likely good intentions, but making it clear that such a discussion would feel intrusive. We then cut to Henry and Anne overseeing Cromwell's bill for the succession, to which Anne takes great offence when she reads, "If it shall happen your said dear and entirely beloved wife, Queen Anne, to decease." This line is an exact quote from the real Act of Succession. Cromwell defends his actions because he can't rule out the possibility, which is true, everyone must die at some point, and due to the mortality rate in the Tudor era, Anne may have died during childbirth, like her successor Jane Seymour. Anne is incensed at the idea of her being replaced, to which Henry tries to reassure her, saying he couldn't imagine anyone else taking her place. Just remember though that she is wife 2 of 6. I take that with a pinch of salt. I also think this is interesting that this is an exact quote from the Act of Succession, as I think this gives Henry a loophole, an out, which I personally think he uses for when he wants to marry Jane Seymour, without all the legal hassle of last time. Anne then quarrels about if her replacement has a son. What will happen to her daughter? A concern that, in hindsight, seemed rather fitting, as Jane would go on to have a son. Henry then reassures her that Elizabeth would still be a princess of England. Which, yeah, kinda, no? Anne then says, why does it not declare Mary a bastard? She yet again refers to Mary as Spanish Mary. Cromwell then informs her it is written in a way that it's not personal, to which Anne responds it is personal. I think this is great from Anne's point of view, as this bill for the succession is supposed to be a great win for her and secures her place as queen. But actually she has so much to lose from this bill, and kind of becomes worse off for it. I actually have a video about why 1534 was the worst year of Anne Boleyn's life, and this act of succession features in it. So please go check that video out. Henry then tells Anne that he should not treat Cromwell as the enemy. Wise words that if she had followed, she might not have lost her head. Anne then shows her nasty nature when she forces Cromwell to add More to the list, despite Cromwell saying that More is not an enemy of the crown. But she just wants to see him squirm, implying that Anne is responsible for the death of More, not Henry. But there is no evidence to suggest Anne played any part in More's death, like in the real timeline. Anne then chases after Cromwell as he is leaving, using the French pronunciation of his name, Cromwell, a reference to her time in France. She then lays out a mirrored version of her future, saying, "I won't die. I will give the king a son. I won't die."
I won't die. I'll give the king a son, and I won't die.
As I said, this is a mirrored version of her future because she does die, she doesn't give the king a son, and she does die. We then cut to a scene of Cromwell trying to get Thomas Howard, the Duke of Norfolk, to agree to help save More's life. Cromwell asks if they should get the Duke of Suffolk, who is Charles Brandon, best friend to King Henry VIII, and his former brother-in-law, as he was married to Henry's sister, Mary Tudor. However, Norfolk says no, his heir is dying, to which he is referring to Charles's only surviving son by Mary, Henry Brandon, who died in 1534, the year that this episode is set. Norfolk then informs us that Charles needs to get breeding again, with his new wife, who is only 14. This is reference to Catherine Willoughby, a girl who was originally intended for Brandon's son, before he decided to marry her himself, just 2 months after his wife Mary's death. Norfolk then says some rather nasty things about his own wife, a reference to the fact that A, he was a nasty piece of work, and B, that they were very unhappily married. There's a subtle reference to the multiple Thomases in the story when Cromwell, Norfolk, Audley and Cranmer beg the king to remove More's name from a bill. This scene playfully highlights how many influential figures named Thomas were involved in Tudor politics. And that's not even including Thomas Seymour. A delighted Henry then informs Cromwell that Anne is with child again. We know that Anne was pregnant again in 1534. We then have a scene between Jane Seymour and Jane Boleyn, which, apart from being another clue that Jane will be Henry's next wife, is literally just exposition to show how sweet Jane Seymour is and how nasty Jane Boleyn is. The portrayal of Jane Seymour and the tensions with the Boleyn faction subtly foreshadows future events in Tudor history. The women then come across a pool of blood on the floor. It's from Anne. She has miscarried her baby. The episode features Cromwell recounting a memory of serving food to a young Thomas More at Lambeth Palace, longing for friendship, but receiving no acknowledgement. This scene adds depth to their complex relationship and Cromwell's background. We are then shown this flashback interspersed with More's execution. We then cut to Cromwell sitting for his infamous Holbein portrait, and they even have Holbein painting it. I think they have done a great job recreating this. I'm going to run through it while showing you a side-by-side comparison, but I mean, chef's kiss to whoever is responsible for this. The pattern of the wallpaper is pretty much exact. The only difference is that in the portrait it's blue, not purple. They've got the panelling down to a T, even where Cromwell is positioned on the panelling. And they have the door frame. Obviously the outfit, it's the same one he's been wearing all series, but also his pose and the angle he is sat at is spot on. By the door is a stool with a scroll on top. The pattern on the stool isn't exact, but it's pretty damn close, and I don't realistically know how much closer they could have got. Cromwell is holding a scroll in his hand. He is also wearing a blue and gold ring on his index finger. You've got the green tablecloth, the documents on the table with a wax seal lined up nicely with its portrait positioning, his book of hours, a quill, and even down to the black and red whatever that is in the corner of the portrait. However, if you look at the rag that Holbein is using to clean his brushes, it is a bluey teal colour, which means he deliberately painted the background that way, and that he is currently working on that section of the portrait. Notice how Cromwell sits near Alice when they talk and not behind his desk, showing that he is having an off-the-record chat with a friend. A point that is backed up by him emptying the room and shutting the door. Alice More rather tearfully pleads with Cromwell, saying how can he leave his wife without company, and then talks about his children. There's two ways you can interpret this. Either Alice has not heard from More, which is plausible as he only seems to write to his daughter Meg when in the Tower, and Alice is not mentioned in his final letter. Go check out my video if you want more information on that. Or his selfishness at not taking the oath and by him being executed, leaving his family. Cromwell goes to see More and he says we have to take away your pens, papers and books, which did indeed happen. In the Thomas More video that I made, that I referenced earlier, I did explain that the letter he wrote to his daughter Meg was actually written with charcoal on any scrap material that he could acquire secretly. Cromwell even uses More's love for his daughter Meg as a manipulation tactic to try and get More to sign the oath. Cromwell then says, "The king is not a cruel man, you know that." To which More responds, "Do I? He never used to be, but now he's changed the company he keeps." Thomas More is a man of principle who values moral integrity over allegiance to shifting political tides, while Thomas Cromwell is a pragmatic and politically astute figure, closely aligned with the king and his agenda. Cromwell's statement, "The king is not a cruel man, you know that," is him attempting to portray Henry VIII as kind-hearted to old friends, possibly to persuade More or justify actions taken in the king's name. This may reflect Cromwell's role as the king's enforcer, trying to manage perceptions of Henry's increasingly ruthless decisions. The statement could also be read as manipulative, designed to remind More of his former closeness to the king and evoke doubt about More's current disapproval. More questions Cromwell's assertion, indicating that his perception of the king has changed. His rhetorical "do I?" suggests a profound doubt about Henry's current nature. By attributing the king's change to the company that he keeps, More subtly critiques the king's advisors and inner circle, including Cromwell himself. This line implies that the king's decisions and behaviour are shaped by the morally compromised individuals surrounding him. The dialogue reflects the corrupting influence of absolute power. More suggests that Henry's once benign nature has been eroded, possibly by flattery, self-interest, or the burdens of ruling. More's response reflects a sense of betrayal and disappointment, as his friend the king now appears unrecognisable due to the corrupting influence of power and advisors. The conversation foreshadows More's eventual martyrdom, as he refuses to compromise his principles despite the increasing cruelty and pressure from Henry's court. You can tell Cromwell is frustrated without saying anything by the way he clenches his documents. He walks out on More, running out of patience and options. The execution scene of Thomas More is presented as a poetic parallel to an earlier scene from episode 2, creating a visual reference to the changing fortunes of the characters. Cromwell has a fever, and he keeps calling for his dead wife Liz, spurred on by the resemblance of his sister-in-law Joan. He then says, "Let me love her, Liz." We don't know who he's referring to. It could be Joan, who he had sexual relations with this series, or it could be, and who I think it is, the girl from Antwerp, Anselma. She's brought up again while Cromwell is having his portrait painted, and Holbein even suggests Cromwell go back and claim her. And throughout this series, Cromwell has stared longingly at the tapestry of the Queen of Sheba, who reminds Cromwell of Anselma. Again, I haven't read the books, but from what I could find online, the reason the Queen of Sheba in the tapestry reminds Cromwell of Anselma is because Anselma was the model for Sheba in that tapestry. So there you go. If that's true, then that makes a lot of sense. In his delirium, Cromwell sees his daughter Grace with her angel wings on. She turns back to face us, Cromwell, and then walks away as if she's acting like a guardian angel to take the dying Cromwell away. Except he's not dying. He also begs for Gregory, and behind the Doctor we see a blurry Tom Holland, who plays Gregory in this series, and yet it's Rafe who holds Cromwell's hand when the fever is bad. So I wonder whether it is actually Rafe behind the Doctor, but he envisions Gregory, hence why he's blurry. Once he's recovered, Cromwell tells Rafe to add Wolf Hall onto Henry's summer progress. We see Henry at Wolf Hall without Anne. This is Cromwell setting up Jane as Anne's replacement, and the start of Anne Boleyn's downfall. Thank you for watching this video. If you enjoyed, please leave a like and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. If you really like this video, then why not leave a super thanks? Or if you really want to support me, you can always pick up a copy of my book, which is now available for purchase on Amazon. Links are in the description down below. If you noticed anything that I missed, please leave it in the comment section. And as always, have a wonderful day. Bye!